Only the brightest stars were visible, all to the west. A dull red glow lit up the sky to the northeast, the color of a blood bruise. Tyrion had never seen a bigger moon. Monstrous, swollen, it looked as if it had swallowed the sun and woken with a fever. Its twin, floating on the sea beyond the ship, shimmered red with every wave. "What hour is this?" he asked Mokoro. "That cannot be sunrise unless the east has moved. Why is the sky red?" "The sky is always red above Valyria, Hugor Hill." A cold chill went down his back. "Are we close?" "Closer than the crew would like," Mokoro said in his deep voice. "Do you know the stories in your sunset kingdoms?" "I know some sailors say that any man who lays eyes upon that coast is doomed." He did not believe such tales himself, no more than his uncle had. Jaerion Lannister had set sails for Valyria when Tyrion was 18, intent on recovering the lost ancestral blade of House Lannister and any other treasures that might have survived the doom. Tyrion had wanted desperately to go with them, but his lord father had dubbed the voyage a fool's quest and forbidden him to take part. And perhaps he was not so wrong. Almost a decade had passed since the Laughing Lion headed out from Lannisport, and Garyon had never returned. The men Lord Tywin sent to seek after him had traced his course as far as Volantis, where half his crew had deserted him, and he had bought slaves to replace them. No free man would willingly sign aboard a ship whose captain spoke openly of his intent to sail into the smoking sea. So those are the fires of the 14 flames we're seeing reflected on the clouds. 14 or 14,000, what man dares count them? It is not wise for mortals to look too deeply at those fires, my friend. Those are the fires of God's own wrath, and no human flame can match them. We are small creatures, men. Some smaller than others. Valyria. It was written that on the day of the doom, every hill for 500 miles had split asunder to fill the air with ash and smoke and fire. Blazes so hot and hungry that even the dragons in the sky were engulfed and consumed. Great rents had opened in the earth, swallowing palaces, temples, entire towns. Lakes boiled or turned to acid. Mountains burst. Fiery mountains spewed molten rock 1,000 feet into the air. Red clouds rained down dragon glass and the black blood of demons. And to the north, the ground splintered and collapsed and fell in on itself, and an angry sea came rushing in. The proudest city in all the world was gone in an instant. Its fabled empire vanished in a day. The lands of the long summer scorched and drowned and blighted. An empire built on blood and fire. The Valyrians reaped the seed they had sown. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Mythical Astronomy pop-up hour thingy. And I have Ball the Bard with me. Unmute yourself and say hello, Ball the Bard.
Hello, Ball the Bard. Ha 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 ha.
You got me. You got me with that. So, hello, folks. I'm not going to wear those annoying glasses the entire stream, but I just, want to start off with something fun. But yes, blood and fire. We're here to talk about the Doom. Particularly, we're going to take some conspiratorial angles on the Doom because it's Sunday Fun Day, and there are conspiracies aplenty running around with the Doom of Valyria.
I mean, with our political situation being what it is, I mean, it's fun to talk about conspiracies that don't mean potentially destroying our government.
Yes, I will refrain from making any sort of jokes, which could end up taking the stream the wrong way. I did do a late night stream with Quinn last night at like 3 in the morning, which politics were involved in. It's unlisted. Quinn is doing these late night streams on his YouTube channel, and then he's not even listing them. They're in some hidden playlist or something. But in any case, it's out there if you can find it. But we are here to talk about the Doom. The Doom is fun. The Doom is exciting. The Doom went kaboom. And like I said, there are some conspiratorial angles.
Valyria went boom. Sorry, I went way back music wise.
There's a few ways you can go with that. But they got that doom in Valyria. So let's start with the basics. All right. So the Doom of Valyria, essentially, George has compared it to Krakatoa and things like that, Mount Vesuvius, except for that it was 14 of them. Valyria was basically an entire island chain that was volcanic, or not an island chain, but a peninsula, an isthmus, if you will. And What happened was they all blew up at once, supposedly, which is quite the thing. It's the first clue that like something unnatural was involved. But the first thing about Valyria that's interesting to me is the idea that they lived on a volcanic empire. And you will be seeing some cattail on Gretchen's side of the
Yes, okay, I will introduce her. This is Anna.
She did a
she
great
will be
like
in and out.
eye roll kind of look there. That was good.
Yes.
So here's the interesting thing, all right? This is actually a meteorite, by the way. I see people asking. This is my meteorite necklace. This is a meteor that fell in Russia. Speaking of Russian conspiracy. Oh, see, I can't even start. No political humor.
No.
None.
Done. No.
This is a meteorite. We're only talking about meteorite. It fell in Russia. Has nothing to do with electoral hacking. And it is very fancy and fun. And this is my whoopee. So in any case, the thing about the Doom, Gretchen, is that they lived on volcanoes for 5,000 years, and we don't hear about any major eruptions. Like, volcanoes erupt periodically. And so the fact that they lived on this this entire volcanic peninsula and built this entire civilization all over it and never had any problems with the volcanoes, this implies that they were using magic to control the volcanoes. And this is the first thing to understand about the Doom, because what they were doing is the 14 fires are implied that they are potentially magical or a source of magic power. And it seems like what happened is that the Valyrian sorcerers kept those fires at some sort of equilibrium. They kept them, humming, but not building up pressure and blowing up. And this is how they were able to exist living on volcanoes for 5,000 years, which otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. And so this is what happened is they're suppressing this volcanic power for 5,000 years. And all of a sudden, all of it blows up at once. So it's strongly implied that whatever sorcery they were using to contain the Doom was disrupted. And of course, that leads us back to the Faceless Men, because it is pretty much said in the books that the Faceless Men did this. And I will pull up the quote for that. Go ahead and pipe up. Say hello. Who's in the chat today? What's going on? We got the Dragon Demands, Flores the Fox, Alicia Kingston, Chow AJ, Mystica Fairy.
We had a super chat from Pat Riley that says, Obvi, the Children of the Forest Faceless Men, fireworms attacked. So, yeah, there you go. Stream over. We have solved the problem. That's it. There's no need to talk about it. Obviously, Children of the Forest Faceless Men, fireworms. All of them. Just all the things happened all at once. And of course, for anyone who watches Avatar: The Last Airbender, as soon as I read your thing, Pat Riley, I immediately thought like everything changed the day that the fireworms attacked, which is Fire Nation attacked, fireworms attacked. Ha 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 ha. David doesn't get that because he's never actually seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is so sad because whenever he talks about the moon, I want to be like, my girlfriend turned into the moon. That's rough, buddy, and he wouldn't get it.
That does sound promising.
Yeah, one of the characters, his girlfriend becomes the moon because the moon is like going to be destroyed, so she becomes the new moon. And then another character, like, yeah, they make that joke. That's rough, buddy. Your girlfriend turned into the moon.
It's a little bit Shannara with the tree, the women that become the tree.
Yes,
but I guess we're in Tropeville here because Nissa Nissa did that too.
Ooh, you're getting some shame. Ha ha! I win.
What's going on?
Yeah, shame on you, David. Mystical Fairy is saying, shame on you, David. You have to see it. It's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a loving recommendation.
Yeah. Carol Funk also says you need to watch it. So yeah, everyone's saying that you need to watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. I will get him to watch it. It's good.
So this is where we're given this clue. The kindly man is telling Arya about the first faceless man. And we actually read this quote in the Danny stream last week with Melanie. It's all about how miserable it is in the mines, about how the slaves are toiling and they're praying for release. And the first faceless man is some dude wandering the hallways who decided that he would be the instrument of these gods that they were praying to. And he gave the gift of mercy to a slave, the most wretched and miserable. And so he's telling this story to Arya. And he says, the first gift had been given. Arya drew back from him. He killed the slave? That did not sound right. He should have killed the masters. Yes, kill the masters. He would bring the gift to them as well. Sorry, what were you saying?
I said, eat the rich, eat the rich.
So he answers, he would bring the gift to them as well, but that is a tale for another day, one best shared with no one. So he straight up says the faceless men, the very first faceless men, did bring the gift to the masters of Valyria. Now, here's the thing. The faceless men started in, at this point here in the mines. And then we know that at some point they went to Braavos with the escaped slaves, that one ship of slaves or 3 ships or whatever it was that escaped from Valyria and founded Braavos. Braavos spent 100 years in the fog, in secret, and then they did the uncloaking. And then once they uncloaked and came out, they established a relationship with Valyria. So that is when, sometime after that, is when the Doom would have happened. So there was a period of time when Braavos existed simultaneously with Valyria. And so the faceless men, it's important to understand this, that when the Doom happened, the faceless men were not merely in the mines killing slaves. They were established in Braavos, doing their thing, taking money to kill people. So that's the first part of all this. And here we have it, right from the head faceless man. He says, we were involved with the Doom, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. But then he says that's a tale better left for no one, which I have a total crackpot tinfoil theory about, which I can go into now if we want to go into tinfoil. As I was thinking, so if the faceless men were somehow involved in killing the masters, well, one house escaped, House Targaryen, and so it made me wonder: are the faceless men trying to train Arya to eventually kill off the final Targaryens? Because who better to get close to Jon if they somehow maybe know that Jon is Rhaegar's son or find out? Who better to get close to Jon than Arya, who he would trust? And so that's why they're trying to get her to like denounce Winterfell and like disconnect from her family, because Jon would trust her because she's Arya. But if she no longer had any allegiance to House Stark, then she might be willing to kill Jon.
Man, it's getting dark right off the bat. Of course, that's what the faceless men want. That doesn't mean that's what Arya's going to do. I haven't thought about that, but that's interesting. The faceless men definitely have an anti-dragon agenda, so it does kind of make sense that they might be training Arya to go after Dany or Jon or both.
Right, because he says the story of killing the masters is a tale left for no one. And we know that no one is like the name given to a faceless man, like once they've kind of completed their training. So he may be trying to tell her, like, you don't get to know that till you've completed your training and become no one, meaning you don't get to know that until you no longer are like tied with House Stark, when you no longer have any family ties. And why would he want her to like not have any family ties in order to tell her that? You would think that like this is the kind of thing that wouldn't necessarily have to wait. But if they're eventually going to send her off. Yes. Oh, yes. 666.
Hey, Kraken Tacos. I can do this real quick. Hang on a second. Give me 30 seconds cover, Baldebard.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So what is the chat thinking about whether or not maybe Arya is involved? Patrick McWhorter says, I think they want Jon to kill Dany. I feel like that's probably primarily deriving from the show. I don't really know what in the books would make us think that Jon, because right now Jon and Dany are nowhere near each other. But it feels like the faceless men would only want Jon to kill Dany if we already know that Jon kills Dany, which both David and I think is.
Yeah, that really makes sense because the faceless men don't have control over Jon. It's Arya that they'd be pointing as a knife at somebody. But to honor said super chat from Kraken Tacos. Oh, needs a little louder. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Kraken Tacos. In case you missed it last week, that's what we do now for super chats. We use our little mini theremin. Wait a second. That's what we do now. And we don't do it too much because that would be too much. We just do it a little bit.
Right.
So, Carol Funk says, thank you. I've been looking for an explanation of Arya's training that makes sense. She's happy with your tinfoil.
Ooh, yay. Well, thank you, Carol Funk. I like my tinfoil.
Now, I will say that with Arya and the Faceless Men, since the topic is brought up, I do think the Faceless Men are somewhat aware that their training is not taking, and they seem to keep promoting Arya, even though she fails and disobeys over and over and over again. So I think that their goal is not necessarily to turn her into an OG actual Faceless Man, but to use her for a very specific purpose. So it very much could line up with some sort of thing like that, where they know that she's not perfectly disassociating from herself. However, they want, they've got an exact mission for her. So the intention,
right, and they might not know that Jon is a Targaryen. So their quest right now might be to get Arya to potentially be in a position where she could kill Dany as the other Targaryen heir. I'm just thinking of like the Faceless Men seem like they might have a vested interest in getting rid of the last former slaveholding family. Like if they were succeeded in killing all the rest of the masters, and yet the Targaryens are still sitting right there, like why aren't they? Maybe they could be involved in trying to get rid of the last dragons. Who knows? They may have been working with Illyrio and Varys to make Aerys go crazy and start the Targaryen civil war, so that all the rest of the Targaryen household would be dead. So
the Faceless Men are definitely some of the best fodder for conspiracy theories in A Song of Ice and Fire. They have money, they have power, they have an agenda that they keep hidden. I don't buy any of their mumbo jumbo about. They talk about death being sacred, and then they just take money to kill people. So that's not very sacred. That's just transactional. But I believe that I missed a super chat from last week from Pat Riley. Pat Riley, are you the one that I missed it from last week and I promised credit? He's asking for Theremin. So I think I either missed his super chat earlier today or last week. And Pat, I'm turning on the delay for you, buddy.
Ooh.
I'll even turn up the delay.
Okay, now we're getting into weird like sci-fi music stuff here. Yeah.
All right, but let's not tank the stream with Theremin. So
yeah, the Faceless Men. Like I was just thinking about how they could function similarly to the Golden Company. Like the Golden Company has an ultimate agenda, which is to get back to Westeros. But in the meantime, they're willing to take contracts and fight for whoever until they are in a position where they can actually accomplish their goals, which is to get back to Westeros. So the Faceless Men could be operating on a similar thing. Like their ultimate goal is to make sure that all of the former masters are dead. But in the meantime, they're totally willing to take contracts and kill people, in the meantime, and use all this, freaky blood magic shit to like do, all of that while kind of playing a long game of eventually trying to get rid of, the final Valyrians.
Yeah, George is constantly suggesting that people are trying to get rid of the dragons. Like with the Dance of the Dragons, it's strongly suggested that the High Towers were the ones that had some kind of agenda like that. And if you think about it, the High Towers are linked to the Maesters, who have a very anti-magic agenda. And the High Towers are one of the powerful families that would stand to gain if the Targaryen dynasty sort of lessens or even crumbles. So that's running there. There's even intersections between the Faceless Men and the High Towers that are interesting to discuss. But I want to get back to the Doom here. So let's see here. What I want to say next about it. Yeah, so I'm looking for that quote about the Lannister gold and the prophecy of that gold having something to do with the Doom. And that quote is hard to find. I think it's in the World of Ice and Fire. But that is an important part of this conspiracy, if you will. So the conspiracy thread that we're following, I guess I'll just go ahead and outline the basic idea of it. This isn't my theory. Alt-Shift-X did a great video on it. It's not his theory either. It's a very old form theory that's been floating around ever since the World of Ice and Fire came out. And so what I'm doing basically is just recapping it and giving it to you guys to check out. But here's the idea, okay? So we know that, like I said, the Faceless Men were involved in the Doom. It's strongly suggested that the Valyrians, like I said, maintained the 14 flames through sorcery. So the logical way for the Faceless Men to cause the Doom is simply to assassinate the mages who were keeping that equilibrium, because you might even only need to do it in one place. There's 14 volcanoes. They might have even only needed to start it in one place. And once the chain reaction started, the whole thing was going to go, because think of a fire that like in a forge that's banked right to a specific spot. Once it's out of control, the thing is already very hot. It's going to blow up. So that's the simple mechanism. They assassinate the mages here and there. I mean, that's what the Faceless Men do. They do assassination. So it's like, what's the simplest way they can cause the doom? Like, they didn't come up with some sort of magical bomb. They just killed the mages. And then once that happened, everything would take its course, and that's the doom. So that's the most likely explanation. The question, though, is, did the Faceless Men just do this as a continuation of, obviously they were formed in the slave mines of Valyria. So you could basically just say, well, they're cleaning up, the Valyrian slave empire. They're killing the people who enslaved, their people. You don't need an extra motivation for it. However, we are given extra motivations. And specifically, it is that line about the gold.
Yeah, that there was a prophecy about Lannister gold.
Yes. And let's see here. And I can't seem to find it. But I guess I shouldn't make everyone wait. The gist of it is that there is some prophecy about the gold of the West being involved in the destruction of Valyria. And that is presented as a possible reason why the Valyrians never came to Westeros. Jaime wonders at a certain point why they never came to Westeros. And here we go. The wealth of the Westerlands was matched in ancient times with the hunger of the freehold of Valyria for precious metals. Yet there seems no evidence that the Dragon Lords ever made contact with the Lords of the Rock, Casterly, or Lannister. Septon Barth speculated on the matter, referring to a Valyrian text that had since been lost, suggesting that the freehold sorcerers foretold that the gold of Casterly Rock would destroy them.
That's what it is.
Archmaester Periston had put forward a different, more plausible suggestion. That's not it. Okay, so the last sentence, isn't it? The first, that's the one we wanted.
The gold of Casterly Rock would bring about the doom.
Right. So how can the gold of Casterly Rock bring about the doom? Well, turns out that the Lannisters bought a sword called Bright Roar, and they paid a very high price for it. Let me see if I can find the exact quote. It's something about an army.
Yeah, something about in the centuries before the doom, the Lannisters bought a Valyrian sword, and that its cost was like the amount of an army.
Yeah, the sword Bright Roar came into the possession of the Lannister kings in the century before the doom, and it is said that the weight of gold they paid for it would have been enough to raise an army. So think about that. This is one of those George clues where, okay, so they gave the gold to, where do you buy Valyrian steel swords from? Obviously some sort of Valyrian, right? And this gold, they even mentioned the doom here as just before the doom. So that doesn't make quite sense, though. Okay, so the Valyrians sold Bright Roar. They got a bunch of money. And how does that have to do with the Faceless Men destroying Valyria? So here's how that would be. Who is the most likely Valyrians to have sold Bright Roar to the Lannisters, I ask you?
Is there a Valyrian family that might have potentially a vested interest in the rest of the Valyrians, like no longer existing?
There is, and it happens to be the same Valyrian family who was the closest to Westeros. They were known for setting up specifically a trade outpost. That is what the Targaryens did on Dragonstone before they invaded Westeros. They were a trading island, very in the sort of Phoenician mold. So kind of makes you think you got these rich Westerosi, crazy for Valyrian steel swords. There's over 400 of them in Westeros. They bought a lot of them. Do you think that like the ancient Starks, when they bought ice, did they sail to Valyria to buy ice? Probably not. They probably bought it from the Targaryens on Dragonstone, or maybe the Valyrians or the Celtigars, because all three of those houses come from Valyria, and they were all said to be involved in trading. They controlled the narrow sea trade, basically, because they're all island strongholds. And so that is what happened before the doom. In fact, let me go ahead and pull that quote up about Dragonstone and the Targaryens.
So Joe Snow in the chat is
Mhm.
saying tinfoil. Tyrion, Western Gold, will hire Arya, Faceless Men, to assassinate Dany, Valyria.
I didn't think about Tyrion hiring a faceless man. That would be dark. I mean, it makes a lot more sense than like whinging at Jon to kill her and then Jon just doing it.
Whinging at Jon with like the horrible speech. I'm still angry, so I'm just gonna not talk about that.
Thank you, Dragon Tacos. Yes, you can support me on Patreon. By the way, I'm doing a very cool Patreon music video right now, and if you sign up for Patreon in the next couple of days, there will still be time to get your starry nickname into the music video, which is going to be oh so cool. But I've got a very generous super chat sitting here from Michael Scarborough, who is a patron of mine. It is a community that challenges my views. Love this fandom. Dany is key to the. Okay, right. So yeah, what we're doing here exactly right. We are trying to challenge what happened with the show and restore faith in Dany, and that is exactly what she's meant to do: defeat the White Walkers. I'm glad it's helping, Michael. And there's a lot of nice comments that I've gotten on the various Dany videos. I see them all. People talking about just, thank you for, it's good to get to know the character again. And I knew it wasn't right what they did on the show and all that kind of stuff. So yay. Anyways, thank you, Michael. That was very generous of you. I appreciate your support, buddy. And so here's the deal. Let me pull up that quote about the Targaryens and Dragonstone. This will be from the World of Ice and Fire. Okay. The proudest city in all the world was gone in an instant. The fabled empire vanished in a day. The lands of the long summer, once the most fertile in all the world, were scorched and drowned and blighted, and the toll in blood would not be fully realized for a century to come. What followed in the sudden vacuum was chaos. The Dragon Lords had gathered in Valyria as was their wont, except for Aenar Targaryen, his children, and his dragons, who had fled to Dragonstone and so escaped the doom. And so that is part of it. Let's see. Okay. So apologize. Impromptu stream. I didn't have all my quotes pulled together ahead of time. Okay, the Targaryens were of pure Valyrian blood, dragon lords of ancient lineage. 12 years before the doom of Valyria, Aenar Targaryen sold his holdings in the freehold in the lands of the long summer and moved with all his wives, wealth, slaves, dragons, siblings, kin, and children to Dragonstone, a bleak island citadel beneath a smoking mountain in the narrow sea. At its apex, Valyria was the greatest city in the known world, the center of civilization. Within its shining walls, 200 rival houses vied for power and glory in court and council, rising and falling in an endless, subtle, oft-savage struggle for dominance. The Targaryens were far from the most powerful of the Dragon Lords, and their rivals saw their flight to Dragonstone as an act of surrender, of cowardice. But Lord Aenar's maiden daughter, Daenys, known forever as Daenys the Dreamer, had foreseen the destruction of Valyria by fire, and when the doom came 12 years later, the Targaryens were the only Dragon Lords to survive. So that is kind of one of the big smoking gun things here. Like, okay, very, very convenient. But I'm looking for the... here it is. It's the next paragraph. Dragonstone had been the westernmost outpost of Valyrian power for 2 centuries. So before the Targaryens came there, it was already a Valyrian outpost for 2 centuries. Its location athwart the gullet gave its lords a stranglehold on the Blackwater Bay and enabled both the Targaryens and their close allies, the Valyrians of Driftmark, a lesser house of Valyrian descent, to fill their coffers off the passing trade. Valyrian ships, along with those of another allied Valyrian house, the Celtigars of Claw Isle, dominated the middle reaches of the narrow sea while the Targaryens ruled the skies with their dragons. So that is, you can see the picture here. Westeros, there's only a couple houses that have sea power. And it looks like in the narrow sea during this time, the Targaryens and the Valyrians and the Celtigars pretty much had it locked down. So again, if there is Valyrian steel being traded and sold into Westeros, it's almost certainly going to come through the Targaryens and the Valyrians and through those trading outposts.
Right.
Which means that when the Lannisters... Go ahead. You want to pipe in? Or
I was just going to say, and the Targaryens had plenty of Valyrian steel. They had, a couple of swords that we know of, even in the main timeline, which is, I mean, neither of the other two, the Celtigars and the Velaryons don't have Valyrian steel so far as we know. So it's just like the Targaryens definitely seem to have plenty of Valyrian steel.
They would be the likely culprits. And so what you've got now is the Lannisters buying Bright Roar, the Valyrian steel sword, with enough gold to pay for an army. They bought it probably from the Targaryens. So now you have the Targaryens sitting there with enough gold to buy an army. And somehow the Faceless Men were involved in the Doom. And somehow the gold of Casterly Rock was involved in the Doom. So now you can see how this is working. The gold of Casterly Rock flowed to the Targaryens. The Targaryens hired the Faceless Men. The Faceless Men killed all the other Valyrians. And the Targaryens were the only ones left with dragons. Au fait accompli. And it's... Right. Honestly, Gretchen, I don't even think this is a conspiracy. I think this is what happened.
I mean, the more I think about it, the more it seems fitting because, I mean, I was kind of joking on Twitter earlier when we were talking about it, but like the Targaryens also raised war dragons. Like they didn't just raise any kind of dragons. Their family household was known for raising war dragons. Like what better way to set yourself up as potentially then conquering the rest of the known world than to kill off all of your competition and be the only one left, not just with dragons, but dragons specifically that were trained for war.
That's right. And this is one of my favorite little in the weeds topics here. This is from a Storm of Swords. And this is Dany and Jorah talking to each other. Dany says, well, how long does a dragon live? She looked up as Viserion swooped low over the ship, his wings beating slowly and stirring the limp sails. Sir Jorah shrugged. A dragon's natural span of days is many times as long as a man's, or so the songs would have us believe. But the dragons the Seven Kingdoms knew best were those of House Targaryen. They were bred for war, and in war they died. So that implies that you might be able to breed dragons for other purposes. And of course, they're intelligent animals. And we know that dogs and horses and most other intelligent animals, you can breed them for different traits and train them for different traits. And so think about it. If you are a Dragon Lord Empire, you have multiple families that control dragons. Specialization is highly likely. Some people would train dragons to be big and nasty and aggressive, and then, but also, you know, somewhat obedient to follow military commands. But what about those Valyrian roads? Whoops. Accidental theremin touch, sorry. Oh, D. Villano pipes in with the timely super chat. Where does the idea that Targs, where that's where I think you must have typed that before I just read that. But yeah, that is where it comes from. That quote that says they were bred for war. And also the simple logic of the Valyrian roads. Okay, so here's the quote about the Valyrian roads.
Once you're done with the Valyrian roads, I typed a theory in the chat, or it's something I thought was cool. I guess so. Read that and then we'll come back to it.
Put a pin in it. They changed out teams only thrice that day, but seemed to halt twice an hour at the least, so Illyrio could climb down from the litter and have himself a piss. Our Lord of Cheese is the size of an elephant, but he has a bladder like a peanut, the dwarf mused. During one stop, he used the time to have a closer look at the road. Tyrion knew what he would find, not packed earth, nor bricks, nor cobbles, but a ribbon of fused stone raised a half-foot above the ground to allow rainfall and snowmelt to run off its shoulders. Unlike the muddy tracks that passed for roads in the Seven Kingdoms, the Valyrian roads were wide enough for 3 wagons to pass abreast, and neither time nor traffic marred them. They still endured, unchanging, 4 centuries after Valyria itself had met the doom. He looked for ruts and cracks, but found only a pile of warm dung deposited by one of the horses. Thank you, George. And so the Valyrian roads, think about building a Valyrian road. We know how fused stone is created. Fused stone is created by a dragon breathing fire onto stone to turn it molten, and a Valyrian sorcerer to shape the stone with magic. And you also need magic to control the dragon. And so you have this molten stone. It would just drip into a puddle, but the Valyrian sorcerers use magic and they whip it up into a nice shape of a dragon turret parapet thing. And then they use sorcery, I guess, to freeze it in place. So think about making a Valyrian road. It's not artistic like Dragonstone. It's very boring. It's miles and miles and miles of straight road. So what kind of dragon would you want? You wouldn't want the war dragon that's all... You'd want like a calm, sedate dragon that just plods along and breathes just enough fire whenever you need, and then stops and waits for the team, and then breathes a little more fire. Like, very docile and controllable. And of course, the other piece of this is that we see a few dragons that get fat and docile when they don't have to fight for a long time. They start to get like kind of lazy and chill, and they don't want to hunt. They get used to food being brought to them. So they're just like any other animal in that sense. You can breed them different ways. Different traits come out. And
like if Dragon Flame was potentially involved in forging, again, you would again want to yet again a different kind of traits for a dragon that you would want to be helping in a forge. You would want, the temperature again would have to be just right so as not to like harm the person doing the forging. You'd have to have even more, I would say probably even more precise control over a flame than building a road, because a road is a nice big giant thing that you can do, and like a forge is smaller. So you can think of all sorts of ways that they could use dragons that aren't just for war. You may have had dragons that were specifically bred for long distance travel, for example, that could fly further than your typical war dragon would. And the same, like horses too. Think of horses. I think horses is just as good an analogy as dogs, because we actually ride horses. Some horses are like a war horse is different than a draft horse is different than like a horse that you're going to use to like travel across the country. They're going to have different muscle mass, different, all of that kind of thing. So, you can see a lot of potential uses for dragons, I think. So the idea of certain ones being bred for war, like, makes sense to me.
It's kind of, once you think about it long enough, it seems kind of inevitable that is how it would have been. It's just simple logic. And George actually compares the dragons to horses on many occasions, particularly when Danny's talking about using a whip and how you control a horse and how you control a dragon. So there you have it. We've got, in Valyria, we can extrapolate that there were different kinds of dragons, and House Targaryen seemed to have war dragons. And that is what they were known for. So this gets into a big mystery of mine with the Doom, which is...
Before we go into that, can I say my theory? It's very short.
Yes, that's right.
Or what I noticed. So if the Targaryens were involved in hiring the Faceless Men, then the Targaryens slew the Masters. In the same way that Danny does.
Ah, yes. That would kind of make sense. And so my question, and this actually ties into what I was just going to get into, is if the Targaryens did this intentionally, actually, it doesn't even matter whether if they knew it was coming because of the prophecy or if they planned it because of the Faceless Men. Either way, they knew it was going to happen. So why did not the Targaryens bring with them a lot of the Valyrian technology? For example, they lost the ability to make more Valyrian steel. That must have been done in Valyria, perhaps by a different family. But the Targaryens in Westeros do not make Valyrian steel. They didn't keep that secret. They didn't have dragonbinder horns. Euron recovers that from Valyria, quote unquote, but no one has seen one in a long time. House Targaryen never had dragon horns. Even glass candles. I could believe that the Targaryens did have some glass candles somewhere that they've used, and maybe we never heard about it because they have all that dragon glass. But we never hear about the Targaryens using glass candles. We don't hear about Aegon or Visenya or anybody using it. If anybody did, it would have been Visenya, but we don't hear about it. So that's a question mark. So why did not the Targaryens bring all this stuff? They also didn't bring slavery, and they didn't bring a lot of the Valyrian customs. And then when they came to Westeros, they adopted a new religion too. So I'm wondering, and this is my question, was there some intention? Did they intend to like shut down the worst parts of the Valyrian Empire, leave behind certain parts of its magic, and only carry with them certain things to sort of restart? Could that have been part of it?
That's an interesting question, because especially if the Targaryens were a minor house in this, big empire, they may have felt, I don't know whether oppressed is the right word, but they may have felt unhappy with the larger cultural milieu, and may have wanted to get out of it. It may also be that just because their house was like, for slavery, for example, that the Targaryen house was so small. Like, it was Aenar Targaryen and like his household. I mean, it might have been a dozen people, that was not enough people to maintain like you know, like one house can't really maintain a culture. I guess is what I'm getting at. Like one singular house can't entirely maintain the weight of an entire culture on its back. And they may have made the decision to like, let's just keep what's necessary, like what we believe is necessary about ourselves and our identity, and like let the rest of it go. Cause we don't, you know, they can't maintain an international slave trade. They can't, you know, be entirely responsible for Valyrian steel. They may not have known. For all we know, like forging Valyrian steel is another very highly specialized skill that ran in families. Maybe there were families that forged Valyrian steel and the Targaryens didn't know how to do it. So it was just like, well, guess we lost that.
So that's the most logical answer. But one thing I'm trying to get at is the morality, the factor here, because what the Targaryens did not do is they did not go to Dragonstone and then try to recreate a new Valyrian empire. And we do see that other people try to do that. After the fall of Valyria, some dragon lords try to do that in Volantis, but get overthrown. And there's another one that tries to go take a big army together. Orion, I believe his name was, and he tried to go to Valyria to restart the empire.
And Geese calls itself one of the first daughters of Valyria. All of the or maybe not old Geese, but what is it? Isn't there some city that calls it? Oh, the daughters. That's Volantis.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about
elements of the Valyrian.
So I'm talking about the people that had dragons, though, specifically. There were people that wanted that had dragons after the Doom. A few people in Volantis. And Orion had a dragon, and they wanted to restart Valyria, but they were not able to. My point is that the Targaryens did not try to do that. They sat on Dragonstone for 114 years before Aegon got the idea of conquering Westeros. And then when he conquered Westeros, he didn't recreate Valyria either. He basically ruled as a Westerosi king. It's possible that there was intention of leaving some of this behind. And it wasn't simply a matter of they didn't have the technology or their family didn't do the glass candles or whatever, although that's obviously
Right. But in terms of, that's a good point. They didn't try to recreate Valyria, and yet they would have been the best poised to do so. In terms of they had the resources, they had three, multiple dragons, however many they had when they were on Dragonstone, when they, first landed there. They had the ability to breed more dragons. Like they were the best poised to recreate Valyria, and yet they decided not to. Which again, like now that I keep thinking about it, like that's a really interesting parallel with Dany. That like this idea of like killing the masters and not recreating systems of oppression might also run in her family as a smaller thread alongside the idea that the Targaryens were from a slave-holding empire. For all we know, they were the Valyrian equivalent of abolitionists. I don't know. Like, we don't know if there are any anti-slave movements, but maybe. I'm just totally wildly speculating. But it's interesting to think about in terms of Dany as like since so much of her arc is about the legacy of being Targaryen and being a Valyrian and having dragons and what that means, the idea of killing the masters, like being a part of that legacy, is actually really interesting, because then she's in some sense also fulfilling her own family legacy as well as potentially subverting it in other ways. So that's a really interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, that really is. I'm sorry, I'm being distracted. So a famous person has just died. And that'd be Kobe Bryant, former Lakers legend, helicopter crash, it looks like.
What?
So, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, everyone's just like, what? So I just
when you said that, I was like, that's a joke, right? Like, but it's not a joke.
No, this news has just broken. It's not even on ESPN yet. It's on social media though. So yeah, rest in peace, I guess. Kobe Bryant.
Yeah, rest in peace, Kobe Bryant.
So I guess if you need to go and think or talk about that, then feel free. But I guess we're going to keep rolling with the stream here.
Chris B pipes up saying Dany is basically righting the wrongs of generations before her, and that's a very interesting idea of what a hero is, which is true. That the hero is the one who rights the wrongs of the past, not just the wrongs of the present, because that's part of what the hero does. Is usually there are bad things happening in the present reality. And so it's their role to right those wrongs, but also someone who specifically is righting the wrongs of their ancestors and past generations.
And just to put a pin in that, because that is the thought that I lost that I want to respond to. Just to be clear, it is not on the news right now. It is only on social media. So perhaps this is some mistake
Elaborate
or
hoax.
something, but I just want to say that it is not on ESPN. It is not on CNN. I'm only seeing it on social media. So I don't want to be responsible for spreading rumors, but everybody on social media is reporting it like it's a thing. So there you go. I will just say that. And maybe in about 5 minutes, I'll be able to clarify. But yes. Okay. So remind me again, what was the last Doom related thought you just had?
The last Doom related thought was we were talking. What were you
just saying?
Oh, I was just saying Dany being a hero because she's righting the wrongs of the past. And that like we think of heroes as righting the wrongs of the present, but Dany is someone who is also specifically setting out to right the wrongs of the past. Done by Targaryens and Valyrians and all of the whole idea of dragon holding. And because no, go ahead.
Okay, so what I noticed is when I was doing the Dany research from Storm of Swords is obviously I named the episode that I did Slay the Masters. And it's this pinnacle line, slay the good masters, slay everyone that has a Tokar. That's in the 3rd book. In the 4th book is when we get this Arya story. And Arya uses that exact language saying he should have slayed the masters. So when he's like, I think that George is intending to connect that in the minds of the reader, especially thinking about this, like, oh, well, the Faceless Men did slay the masters, but they were paid by House Targaryen to do so. And here comes Dany. And that's why I get the idea that maybe House Targaryen didn't just do this for pure advantage. Maybe they took down the Valyrian Empire because they thought it was wrong. I mean, it's not a crazy thought that somewhere in the 5,000-year course of the Empire, some Valyrian lord is going to be like, wait a minute, aren't we sort of genocidal slave lord maniac killer people? Isn't this bad? And maybe has a different thought. And what do? Like, you can't overthrow the Valyrian Empire with like 5 dragons. Like, they have hundreds of dragons. They sent 300 dragons against the Rhoynar and boiled the frigging river. So how do you stop something so evil? There's nothing in A Song of Ice and Fire that is as evil as the Valyrian slave empire. Nothing. And so if you wanted to end it, how would you do that? This is how. I mean, this is how you hire the Faceless Men to do it. And you would tell nobody. You'd be like, oh yes,
prophecy.
This dream. Yeah.
She had a dream that everyone was, and oh man, no one believed her. Damn it. Sucks for them. We were the only ones who believed her prophecy. Yeah. We had nothing to do with it, guys. Nope. Not at all. No, that makes sense. And that is a very interesting. It's a very interesting and intriguing possibility. And I'm not sure we're ever going to get answers on it, but it could be that Martin's doing his typical elusive thing where like showing us Dany, because, sometimes looking at the history gives us insight into the present. Sometimes looking at the history of, the world of Westeros and on the stories from the past and the legends and all of that gives us insight into the present. But sometimes it works the other way. Sometimes what's going on now, we can use to maybe understand events that are more mysterious in the past. So it could be that him showing us Dany slaying the masters is his way of like reflecting back on the Targaryens' involvement in the Doom. And we're meant to kind of connect those things. Present should show us what the past did, as opposed to the other way, which is typically a lot of how, especially like you and I are working with predicting kind of end game for the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, is like looking at the past to understand what might be coming in the future. But it may be that the present is supposed to do the same thing.
George is he's a big fan of that whole Wheel of Time concept. And it never be exactly the same, but yeah, past and future often have those nice ties to each other.
Yeah.
And so here is the quote about it does say, so 2 quotes. One is that when it says that Aenar went to Dragonstone, it said that with all his wives, wealth, slaves, dragons, siblings, kin, and children. So he did take slaves to Dragonstone. Now I don't know how long they kept those slaves, because obviously slaves aren't allowed in Westeros.
Right.
So if
And
it
we don't
really
really hear about them after that. Basically,
no.
from Aegon, by the time we get to Aegon the Conqueror, like there's no mention of slaves.
And it is still possible that perhaps he was drawing the line saying, well, my household slaves that I treat nicely are fine, but and wiping out whole peoples and force feeding them into the mines to die is wrong. That is a moral line that somebody could have drawn within the context of that historical time period. But duly noted. Thank you, someone, for bringing that up. And then this is the other quote I wanted to bring up. This is something we were talking about a second ago, but this just really locks down the idea that it was the Targaryens selling Valyrian steel to Westeros. So with the destruction of the Rhoynar, Valyria soon achieved complete domination of the western half of Essos, from the narrow sea to Slaver's Bay, and from the Summer Sea to the Shivering Sea. Slaves poured into the freehold and were quickly dispatched beneath the 14 flames to mine the precious gold and silver the freeholders loved so well. Perhaps in preparation for their crossing of the narrow sea, the Valyrians also established their westernmost outpost on the isle that would come to be known as Dragonstone, some 200 years before the Doom. No king opposed them, and though the local lords of the narrow sea made some effort to resist it, the strength of Valyria was too great. With their arcane arts, the Valyrians raised the citadel of Dragonstone. 2 centuries passed, centuries in which the coveted Valyrian steel began to trickle into the Seven Kingdoms more swiftly than before. So that pretty much tells you, once they established Dragonstone, more Valyrian steel came into Westeros. So that really does tell you that if the Lannisters brought Bright Roar, they would have bought it from the Targaryens on Dragonstone. And that's where that gold went. So can you think of any other way that the gold, and I'm wearing my gold dragon sweater here, of House Lannister could play into the Doom? I mean, there's really not another way that it can be involved other than this theory. And that's why I say, I really do think that this is what happened, that the Bright War money went to House Targaryen, they hired the Faceless Men, and that's what happened. And so here's the thing. If that's true, and the Faceless Men know that House Targaryen pulled an inside job, hashtag the Doom was an inside job, could they actually not be totally anti-Dany? Like if Dany is a dragon lord that ends slaves, and they know that the Targaryens brought down Valyria, I don't know. It just makes it a little more complex. Like, could that knowledge, the fact that the Faceless Men know about this, could it be important? That's the question I'm asking. To you.
No, that does raise a good point, and it might explain why the Faceless Men never moved against the Targaryens. Because someone had brought that up earlier when I was running my tinfoil about Arya. That the Faceless Men didn't move against the Targaryens even after they came to Westeros. So far as we know, they never moved against them. So if they were kind of working together to end slavery in Valyria, or at least that the Faceless Men knew, like, the Targaryens are the people who originally hired us to assassinate, the guildmasters that then led to the Doom of Valyria. Maybe we should leave them alone. Like maybe they're the good master. Like maybe they're the good, they're good Valyrians. Maybe we should leave them alone because they're anti-slavery.
So you see the train of thought here that I'm saying, like, so someone else brought that up. If the Faceless Men brought down the Empire of Valyria because they don't like dragons and slave lords, why then did they not go and finish off the Targaryens, who only had a few dragons and a few people? A couple of, like, one Faceless Man could have done it.
Right.
Look at all the damage Andrew Farman did,
Right. Yeah. And especially because up until Aegon, like, the Targaryens seemed pretty happy to just kind of sit on Dragonstone and do whatever their thing was, whether it was continuing trading, probably. They didn't seem at all poised to, like, even take over Westeros. They were just sitting around until Aegon got involved. Until Aegon and his sisters invaded. So, I mean, yeah, they could very well have just, like, left them well enough alone for that long for that reason. I think that's a really good idea. I like that.
And that's another sign of a conspiracy, isn't it? Like the fact that they left the Targaryens alone after killing all the other dragon lords.
Right.
Like I said, they were so close to finishing the job and ridding the world of dragons. Wouldn't they have been worried that the dragons eventually would have multiplied and you would have had the whole problem again? So,
Right. Or just recreating Valyria, like you were saying earlier. Like, why didn't they seem to be worried that, like, Targaryens, the only, like, Valyrian household left with dragons, wasn't just going to restart Valyria once they settled? Which the Faceless Men would not want to have happened. So, yeah.
Crispy has a related point here. Dany coming to Braavos, where the Faceless Men are located, has to mean something important too. No way the Faceless Men never knew about her until recently.
That's a good.
It wasn't exactly hidden. Yeah.
She was hanging with the Sea Lord. I mean, she and her brother were living with the Sea. That may actually have been why Braavos was willing to take them in. Now that you think about it, that the Braavosi were willing to take in Dany and Viserys, the Sea Lord of Braavos, not just Braavos, but like the head guy of Braavos was willing to take them in precisely because they're Targaryens.
Kind of like
there's some history
Putin's
there.
Russia, like you don't get rich in Putin's Russia without Putin say so. I don't think you become the Sea Lord of Braavos without Faceless Men approval, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is another interesting conspiratorial angle.
Right. Oh, and when you look at Fire and Blood, there are a lot of ties between the Targaryens and the bank, the Iron Bank. I think one of the Targaryens at one point marries someone who's high up in the Iron Bank or really well connected to it. There are lots of ties between the Targaryens. You can trace some ties between the Targaryens and you have the Iron Bank. And like the Iron Bank and the Faceless Men are like hand in glove. They're absolutely, I'm 100% convinced that they're connected, and that the vaults that they keep all the money are somehow connected to the vaults in the House of Black and White. That like the Iron Bank is just like the facade for the Faceless Men, or that they're like very, very closely tied. So
that's I take that as a given. But this raises a new question of what they want that book, The Death of Dragons, that Jaqen was stealing from the Citadel for. Everyone assumed, well, because that book is called The Death of Dragons, but it actually just contains tons of dragon knowledge. Mm-hmm. So they might be getting that book to figure out how to kill dragons, or they might be getting it to potentially help Daenerys if they have a different agenda. I've never even thought about that. And it sounds
hadn't either. Sounds crazy, but I feel like we're pulling at this little thread in a tapestry and like seeing where it goes. That's interesting to think about, that they could be wanting to work with Dany, not against Dany. And they've got an agent in Old Town right now, which is where Euron is heading, and where Dany could potentially link up there. I think it could be interesting to like see if the Faceless Men ever contact Dany, because it is okay. So when you think about it, has Dany ever been attacked by a Faceless Man? Lots of people have tried to assassinate her, but the Faceless Men no one's tried to hire a Faceless Man to attack Dany. Or so far as we know, no one's tried to hire a Faceless Man to attack Dany.
No one successfully has hired a Faceless Man. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yes. No one has successfully hired a Faceless Man. But like a bunch of other kinds of assassins have been hired. The Sorrowful Men. And you have the Wine Cellar. Like, people are trying to assassinate Dany. Several people with money. Like, it's not like the people in Karth don't have the money. If they can hire a Sorrowful Man, the Sorrowful Men are trying. Yeah,
Littlefinger suggested it, but it was shot down and nobody ever did it. So
right.
I'm wondering if, God, this has really got my wheels turning. See, so let's ask this question. If the Faceless Men don't want to just kill Dany and kill the dragons, that means that they have a use for Dany and the dragons. What could that use be? Well, they could be aware of the others and the White Walker threat. They could be aware of Euron and what he's been doing. Those are the two things that leap to mind, right?
Right.
I mean, the Faceless Men, they kind of know everything. That's the thing. Like, they stay aware. They collect information. And they seem to be aware of just about everything. The Iron Bank is obviously aware of everything that's going on in the north. So.
Right.
Yeah.
They have to know what Dany is doing in Slaver's Bay. And if any of them were on the fence, like, this is a sign that Dany is someone who if the ideology behind the founding of the Faceless Men, or a significant part of it, was killing the Masters, like, Dany is like their Azor Ahai, I guess. Like she she's someone they would want on their side because she's willing to kill she's willing to destroy the modern version of the slave trade in the same way that you know, the Targaryen was involved in destroying the Valyrians. It just seems like there are a lot of threads that you can connect. And whether or not maybe they didn't have a use for her before, but now that she's, you know, been in Slaver's Bay and done everything that she's done, maybe now they could potentially find a use for her.
But like we said, they've been choosing not to kill her for a while, and it could just be plot convenience because George didn't want Dany to die, and he wanted the Faceless Men to exist, and he just hasn't invented a reason why they didn't kill her yet. But for the most part, George's plotting usually bears this kind of scrutiny. You can usually thread through it and figure out, you know, reasons why people would do things that make sense. So yeah, this is what I'm wondering. What purpose could they have for Dany? I mean, they're anti-slavery as presumably, at least they were when they were founded. It's been a long time though, so their mission could have drifted. That's just the thing about the Faceless Men is we just really don't know what they're up to.
Right, because it makes me where my wheels start going is, are they aware of the others? Do they know what the others are? And could they be aware that Dany is someone who could destroy the others? I mean, when you think about Faceless Man ideology, on the surface of it, their religion is about giving the gift of mercy to those who feel trapped within their existence. Like they have the whole temple set up. Yes, you can hire them as assassins, but the religious death cult part of it is that people can come to them for the gift of death. The gift of death typically as like a release probably from suffering of some kind.
Correct, yeah.
Think about how that maps onto the others and the whites as like needing release and freedom and the gift of death, like the gift of a final death instead of being brought back to life and controlled by an outside force. Like Dany is poised to bring the gift, like the final gift of death to all of the like all of the whites that have ever been controlled by the others. And she does so by slaying the masters. So the two things we know about the Faceless Men are two things that line up with who Dany is as a person. She slays the masters and she's poised to free those who are trapped by giving them the gift of a final death and a final rest, which is everything that the Faceless Men represent. So like,
that's very good points.
If they know what the others are, you could draw a line saying if the Faceless Men are aware of what the others are, and maybe this death cult is their way of preserving some ancient idea that eventually you have to kill the others. Like it could very well be that this is like a religious remnant of an older idea of like there are masters out there, and the way that you have to destroy them and give the gift of death, and that like who are they but the others? So
yeah, because so you said a few interesting things in there, and I want to stop you before you say any more interesting things. Oh geez,
lining up what I was saying.
The motivations work, and what I was going to say is that the Faceless Men, they are not magic skeptical. Like they believe in magic. They seem to be using magic. In fact, the way that I see the Faceless Men as they approach magic in a very utilitarian fashion. And I think that they basically collect techniques, whether it's, you know, Jaqen does a visual illusion where he passes his hand over his face and changes his face. That is sorcery. What they do with Arya is arguably sorcery, although it could be Qyburn-esque pseudoscience as well. But the point is, the Faceless Men definitely are aware of magic. They arguably use magic. And so they would probably be aware and concerned about the White Walkers. Then we have Hardhome and the wildlings that were picked up as slaves and taken to Braavos. So just recently, if you remember Mother Mole, that wildling that led a bunch of them to Hardhome, to the frozen shore, they were picked up by Braavosi slave ships. 2 big ships came and picked up a bunch of slaves, and they're talking about going back for more. And so,
well, not Braavosi slave ships, but slave ships. They can't be Braavosi because Braavos doesn't have slavery.
There is a tie. So Arya hears about it in Braavos. I think what happens is the Braavosi sees one of the ships. That's what it is. They seize one of them because, like you said, they're anti-slavery.
Yes.
But the news reaches Arya that these slave ships have been picked up at Hardhome. And all those slave ships are going to have wildlings on board, which are going to have tales of whites and others, multiple accounts. So if the Faceless Men weren't aware of the White Walker threat before, they definitely are now. That is what I was trying to say.
Right. Yep.
This is cool. This is not a direction I thought this was going to go in, as far as reevaluating what the purposes of the Faceless Men might be. But that is pretty exciting.
But yeah. So yeah, they could be aware of the others. And what I was starting to get into was the idea that their religion in and of itself might be some cultural artifact of the knowledge of the others, that they're somehow tied together. And so that might be their way of preserving the knowledge that that someone has to give the gift of death. And that's their role. That it is the role of, it's a sacred role to give the gift of death, to be the part of bringing death, and that death is a gift, and death is a mercy. And that's what we're seeing with Dany, that there is a form of death that is merciful. By killing the whites, that's like freedom and death for the whites are the same thing.
Yes.
Because what is trapped is like whatever is left of their soul or consciousness inside of their body when they become whited, like we see when Bran takes control of Hodor, or with Thistle and Varamir Sixskins, that there is kind of something left, and that thing being left behind, like, it shouldn't happen. That's an abomination. That whatever that piece of themselves is ought to go on. So death and freedom is the same thing for the whites. So Dany being poised to bring, to free the white slaves is also Dany bringing death. She's also then a death bringer. But in that sense, it's a good thing. Kind of like the Faceless Men. The Faceless Men would be all about death bringing as mercy in this case.
And as you and I have discovered, finding these thematic links between different ideas in the story is often very fruitful, because George is a good writer and he's done 8th grade book reports and he likes themes. And so I really like this idea that, why would the Faceless Men like Dany? Well, not only does she slay the masters, but like you said, she is bringing a deliverance style gift of death. And to the extent that we've talked about Dany's destructive dragon nature, we've talked about it as a cleansing fire that's going to clean away the rot. And if she plants seeds, which she does plant seeds, she grows, not only does she plant trees in Meereen, by the way, she plants beans. Lowly, simple, humble beans. Anyways.
Also,
so if Dany does, hang on, let me finish my thought. So if Dany does plant seeds for the future, like we said, she probably won't be around to see them harvest. But go ahead.
Recall that the first ones to die were the slaves. That the first ones to receive the gift of death were slaves. In the same way that the last ones to receive the gift of death in the story could be the slave whites. Like that, it's when Arya hears the story about the Faceless Men, she says they should have slayed the masters, but that's because it was the slaves that were being killed. The slaves were the ones being given mercy because of their suffering, which is what Dany will, I think, be doing. She's going to be freeing the slaves by killing them in the same, with the gift of mercy, in the same gift of a merciful death, in the same way that the first slaves in the mines were the first ones to die with the gift of mercy. So it all kind of like seems to go together. And the other thing it makes me think of what a good thematic parallel it would be then for Arya to be killing Lady Stoneheart, which is one of my personal things that I want to see happen, because thematically it's really powerful. Also heartbreaking for Arya to have to kill Lady Stoneheart, but that would be a really good parallel, because Arya is trained as a Faceless Man. She's literally trained as a Faceless Man. For her to have to go and give the gift of a merciful death to her whited mother would fit very well with Dany being the one to give the gift of a merciful death to all of the whites. Like, it would be a perfect one of those like echoes that, please, George, please.
And just to tease some of the Dany stuff that I've been doing on my channel with All the Bard and Melanie Lot 7, in case you haven't seen those, I've got 3 Dany videos up now, and they're in playlist right on the front of my YouTube page. And we did talk about this. We teased this idea. We talked about it a little more in depth, and I'm going to follow up on it again. But yeah, Dany is marching through Slaver's Bay and her entire arc, basically protecting people, collecting strays, collecting refugees, and adopting them as her children. And so she's liberating slaves, she's taking care of children, and she's slaying the masters. And we've pointed out, just as Gretchen was saying, that you can take that theme and carry it out and see how it will apply to the others, because the others, the whites, are called thralls. And so we have that slave master situation set up. And if these whites, as Gretchen was saying, are suffering in some way, if their soul is trapped in some way, they're not allowed to move on to the afterlife, whatever it is, to go into the rocks and trees and shrubs and bushes, then killing the whites will be liberating them as slaves, and killing the others would be equivalent to slaying the masters. And then as I was mentioning last week, Dany has her, basically her killing the others dream, her biggest foreshadowing of fighting the others, when she's flying on Dragonback at the Trident and melting enemies armored in ice. She has that dream the night before she goes and frees the Unsullied, which is also compared to the Trident. So the idea of her fighting the others is directly linked to her propensity for freeing slaves. And so that is yet another, I think, one of the most strongest pieces of evidence that the conclusion of her arc will be in the north, fighting the others, not coming back down to fight Cersei after all that is done. That entire order is screwed up, but there you go.
Yeah. I don't know how to change names brings up a really good point. And I'm interested to hear what you think about it. He says the faceless men are putting on the face of the dead and walking around as the dead. Faceless men are thematically the others, not the anti-others. What do you think about that? Because one of my first thoughts is that the faceless men seem more parallel to like the shadowy assassins. Potentially green zombies, maybe. But the idea of like they are a guild of like dark assassins, and the dark assassins seem to be more aligned with like the weirwood goddess attempting to escape versus the people who are entrapping the weirwood goddess.
So let's pause that.
Anyway, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Let's start. I'll just back up before we get too in the weeds and no one knows what the hell we're talking about. So the House of Black and White has a ton of weirwood and green seer symbolism. The kind the old man parallels Bloodraven, especially when Arya plucks the worm out of his eye. It's an illusion, but of course Bloodraven's root in his eye is described as a worm. And the doors are weirwood and ebony. It's got a moon face, so you got a weirwood face on the front door. You go in and it's all dark inside, just like Bloodraven talks about, darkness is your mother's milk, Bran, and they hide in the dark and the darkness keeps them safe and all that. So there's these very, very strong parallels between the House of Black and White and basically the inside of the weirwood tree. And so Arya has all this cool skinny squirrel, child of the forest, and symbolism, as well as her actual skin changer ability. So it makes sense to see her running around inside of a symbolic weirwood tree. So the question is, the faceless men, what do they symbolize? Well, I think there is a certain parallel to them wearing the dead faces and the others controlling the whites. But that doesn't mean that they're the same, because frequently we find opposite forces in this story that have that sort of parallel relationship. And I think that if you look at the faceless men, they're a little bit different in that the dead faces that they have either come from people who come and give themselves up willingly to the temple, or really bad people that, somebody went and paid to have them killed, which is not obviously consensual as the other one, but it's not exactly a direct parallel to the others enslaving everyone. I don't know. So far, the people we've heard about the faceless men killing were bad people, except for I guess Pate, the pig boy, didn't really do nothing wrong. He was kind of shitty, but
he was kind of a tool. But I mean, I don't think not the kind of tool that like just immediately deserves to die. He's just kind of a shithead.
I was thinking of the guy Arya kills, who collects the binders on the sailors and then double cross some poor widow or something. Like, yeah, kill that guy.
Was that in the books?
That's in Dance with Dragons.
Okay, because I know it was on the show. On the show, they made it very clear that there's like, he's a bad person, kill him. Whereas I felt like I can't remember. So I trust you. You've read it more recently than I have.
So that reminded me of a really cool Arya foreshadowing scene. So this is when Arya is scouting this kill, and she goes down to the inn and she sees this broker taking binders and stuff, and she's basically observing him. And so, and she's going by Cat of the Canals, by the way. So the narrative is referring to her as Cat here. So the old man's hands were the worst thing about him, Cat decided the next day as she watched him from behind her barrow. His fingers were long and bony, always moving, scratching at his beard, tugging at an ear, drumming on the table, twitching, twitching, twitching. He has hands like 2 white spiders. And Arya kills him with coins. I have to look, but some of those coins are dragons. But the point is, we've got a man with hands like white spiders, and they're white bony hands, which is the description of the other. So this is a lot of other symbolism on this guy that Arya is being sent to kill. So that does give me hope that Arya that the Faceless Men might be anti-other, and that maybe they are preparing people to fight the others. Or at the very least, that's what Arya's going to do. Oh, looks like the bird timer is off. 1 second.
For everyone who doesn't know, that's Cleo. She's throwing a tantrum, and she makes the most ridiculous noise. She sounds like she's a turkey being strangled, which is funny because, as you will see, hopefully David will bring her around. She's a very dignified, very beautiful bird. She's very pretty. Lovely woman, and her energy is very much that of a like, oh, there she is. Hi, Cleo. I was just explaining that Cleo is a very pretty girl.
I can I can still hear you because of my wireless earbuds.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she's very beautiful, very dignified, but makes a terrible, awful, strangled turkey noise.
Yeah. Well, everyone just heard it. So, and this is Goose.
Hi, Goose.
Good boy. Give a kiss. Can you give a kiss?
Goose.
Hey, buddy. Nope. You want to scratch? All right. I'm going to put him down so we can do a stream. Be good, buddies.
Cleo makes for a very fancy pirate bird. She's for fancy pirates. Not your everyday pirate.
I will just show the audience. I have these little things. They're little trees. They're like perches, and the birds chill on them. And then I do my thing. And usually they're fairly quiet if they can see me. So,
Guilty Undertaker asks if Goose is as vicious as his namesake.
Yes. No. Well, he can be.
He's not he doesn't go out of his way to be an asshole. Geese are assholes. Like, geese go out of their way to fuck up your day.
I mean, Goose egg. Well, okay, so Goose eggs Cleo on all the time. I have a missing key on my keyboard. Goose ate that. I mean, he's definitely a butthole sometimes.
I wouldn't call him vicious.
And when he bites really hard. Although
he's generally good-natured, though, right?
He is. No, he's a sweet little boy, but he's got a streak. Anyway,
right. It's the dinosaur energy. You just like you can take the bird out of the dinosaur. You can't quite take the dinosaur out of the bird. At some level, they remember that they were in charge of the world, that they ruled the world, and they resent the fact that they are now our little pets that are like this big.
That is approximately the bird energy, correct. And so I want to thank all 170 people who are indulging the bird talk and hopefully enjoying the stream here. So I'm trying to think if there's any other things I wanted to get to about the Doom. I mentioned the idea that House Targaryen was shaped by the Doom, and we've touched on that. So consider where House Targaryen comes from. Like I said, they are survivors of this empire. They only brought 5 dragons. They didn't bring a lot of the Valyrian technology, and they kind of hit a refresh, a restart. But this probably, the fact that they sat on Dragonstone for 114 years and didn't do anything with their dragons, really, I got to think maybe they were lying low. It's like whoever, the Valyrians have a bad reputation, and they didn't want to lose their dragons that they had. I think they took 5 with them, is what it said. But they definitely laid low for a while before Aegon decided to conquer Westeros. So, you have any idea why Aegon did that, by the way? It's not really
sure. Not really clear. I don't know. I don't buy into the Aegon conquered Westeros to eventually fight the others. I don't entirely buy that idea. I think that I think he was goaded into it. I think it had everything to do with just, I don't know, that he had, well, because it all starts because like he's petitioned by one of the houses of the Trident to like come fight for my side and I'll let you marry my daughter. And he's like, I already got 2 wives, so I could just take it. Like, I don't need your daughter. How about I just come in and like take over all of you, take over all y'all. I got the sense that Aegon also, that he might have been encouraged by his wives to do more. He doesn't strike me as entirely ambitious without being roused. Aegon doesn't. He strikes me as someone who kind of had to be like, hey, how about, hey, we've got dragons. We could just go like take their shit from them. We could just do that.
About this yesterday. He's a little bit of a Mary Sue, a little bit of an empty suit, an empty vessel. Like we don't have strong quotes from him. There's not a lot of passion that we see. He kind of does things like pretty well. And like, but there's just, the only time we ever see emotion from him is that Dornish letter thing, which is really hard to understand. He gets upset and squeezes the letter and his hand bleeds and he flies to Dragonstone and back the next day. But apart from that, Aegon really is like, we only understand him from the history books. We don't understand anything about him personally, really. We know more about Rhaenys and Visenya's personalities than we do Aegon. Which is kind of weird.
Right. And Alicia Kingston is pointing out that like even down to ruling, Aegon seemed to leave that to his sisters. Exactly. That like it definitely seems to me that like, and even I think even the World of Ice and Fire, I know it's in Fire and Blood, and I think it's in one of the passages from the World of Ice and Fire, but I can't remember that they like even in the histories they say that Aegon sat the throne, but like his sisters basically did everything for him. That they seem to definitely have been the brains. He might have been the brawn and he might have been the face because he's a dude and it was Westeros, which is patriarchal, and so you can't just have like the ladies in charge. But yeah, so Aegon may have been the face of the crown, but it does seem like his sisters were, and I would say probably Visenya more than Rhaenys. Visenya seems to be the ambitious one, the ones with desire for conquest and being in charge, even more than Rhaenys was. Which isn't to say that Rhaenys might not have had those same ambitions, but Visenya seems to be the one with the strongest ambition of the 3.
Yes, and if you look at Fire and Blood, she often was pushing Maegor to do things too.
Right, exactly.
I really do. Like, should we be talking about Visenya the Conqueror more than Aegon the Conqueror? Quite possibly.
Visenya. Which maps really interestingly onto Alicent Hightower and Aegon II during the dance. Because Aegon II doesn't seem to have been as ambitious, but the Hightowers absolutely were. And Alicent Hightower really resented the fact that Viserys I never made Aegon II his legitimate heir. She was super pissed because she really wanted Aegon on the throne. And Aegon seems to have been more the like, well, if you're going to give it to me, I guess, sure, I'll take it. And, when he ascended the throne, his family, like, he was told that Rhaenyra was going to kill his whole family if he didn't steal the throne from her. So, like, sure. And once he got on the throne, he clearly wanted to have power. But I think the initial nudge getting him there probably came from Alicent. And that might also map onto Visenya, that she seems to be the one who had desire for greater authority. Because you're right, she pushes Maegor too.
Yeah.
Because she also, she resented the fact that Maegor was not the firstborn child as well. And she really wanted Maegor to be on the throne, but instead it was Aenys, and she may have even been, involved in killing him. So
she's showing consistently that she is aggressive, assertive, pulls strings. Being anger translated here. Visenya does all that stuff, so it would make a lot of sense if she was pushing Aegon. That really would. And so, of course, this is where we mentioned that yesterday we found out House of the Dragon is casting for Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya, which means that it is starting with the conquest, which we weren't sure about. We weren't sure if they were going to start with the dance or go all the way back to the conquest. And we know that they probably are going to do the dance. So this means that we could have different seasons that jump forward in time with whole new castings. That's what I was hoping they would do. And I don't really see any other way to do it, because once the conquest runs its course, I mean, I don't know that they're just going to keep going with like, all right, now we're going to talk about Aenys and Maegor and their children and their descendants and just work all the way through it. I think they're probably going to dip into the stuff that has the most characters. The Dance of the Dragons is by far the most fleshed out drama in all of Fire and Blood. It has the most players, the most well-developed plot lines, multiple interests happening. The Conquest is probably second, but even with the Conquest, it's a little bit threadbare, and they're going to have to pump it up and add some more characters to like really flesh it out and make it a whole show. And I guess Jaehaerys and Alysanne is the other era that has enough material.
Yes. So that could get you 3 seasons. I mean,
or 6, 2 for each.
Yeah, potentially because leading up to Jaehaerys, you have Maegor the Cruel, and that's like it's really shitty period of history, but like enough stuff happens. You could do Maegor the Cruel, and then if they do that, I'm super excited because then I would get to see that we might get Rhaena and Alyssa Farman, who I love. I love them. That's what I mentioned this earlier. Someone came in and said they admired my headgear. So earlier this year at Ice and Fire Con, I did a Rhaena Targaryen cosplay, and it was this Rhaena. It's the Rhaena Targaryen who's older. She's the older sister to Jaehaerys. And this was my crown for Rhaena. I love Rhaena. And we could get Alyssa Farman, which would be really cool to have Alyssa Farman because she's awesome.
And she's great.
Yes, and she's Quaithe. I was just about to say that. You finished my thought. I was like, and she's Quaithe, which would, tie in very nicely. So, yeah, it was pretty exciting. Also, people are loving the birds. Carl.
I see that, yes.
Carl Karsnock earlier said that he loved that we've got two grown-ups. Two grown-ups sitting around wearing like headgear and birds, and I have a cat on my lap, and we're talking about like mythology and symbolism. I've got my like Egyptian background, and
I would never do this on a Monday, but on a Sunday, sure. Absolutely.
Sunday fun day. Except we're gonna be doing this again on a Wednesday.
Yes, we are. Oh, good promotion skills. Yes, Wednesday night, 7:00 Eastern. We are doing a Dany Q&A. We've done the first 3 books of Dany's stuff, and I've been plowing through the outline, have not been taking a lot of questions. So we're going to do a Dany Q&A, open it up to you fine folk so that you can bring up any various Dany discussion point. And we're also going to clean up a few things from Storm of Swords that we didn't get to at the end of the book, such as the Mysa moment, crucifying the slavers in Meereen, and her decision to stay in Meereen instead of going to Westeros. Oh, what is this? Animal competition now?
Well, and the ambitious witch Izalith was asking where the cat was, and I said, she's on my lap. This is my kitty. Her name is Anna. So, yes, there's a cat.
Goose is over there just like muttering satanically.
He's trying to cast spells. He's trying to call down the 14 flames or something. Call down the moon meteor apocalypse on your house.
One of these days. So, here's a cool quote that I wanted to read that I got a couple queued up here, just some Valyria Doom related quotes. So here it says, Archmaester Marwyn's Book of Lost Books. This is Roderick the Reader talking in the Iron Islands. He lifted his gaze from the pages to study her. Hotho brought me a copy from Old Town. He has a daughter he would have me wed. Lord Roderick tapped the book with a long nail. See here, Marwyn, that's Marwyn the Mage, claims to have found 3 pages of signs and portents, visions written down by the maiden daughter of Aenar Targaryen before the doom came to Valyria. So George is teasing this a little bit. Roderick the Reader, Marwyn the Mage, Tyrion, these are all people that either have seen this book or could come in contact with the book that could know something about this. So the idea of these dragon books, there's a few floating around there. Signs and portents. There's literally one called Fire and Blood. And there's the one that Marwyn, that is the one that Marwyn stole from the, not Marwyn, sorry, Jaqen from the Citadel. That is called The Death of Dragons, but also known as Fire and Blood, correct?
I think so.
Yeah, so I love books, and I like that George is starting to like circulate some of these books. I dig that. And it's also interesting that Roderick the Reader is in the Euron plot arc, and he's talking about the Doom of Valyria, and he's talking about Sign's importance. And of course, Euron has the Dragonbinder horn, which I have a quote about here. That horn you heard, I found amongst the smoking ruins that were Valyria, where no man has dared to walk but me. This is Euron, obviously. You heard its call and felt its power. It is a dragon horn, bound with bands of red gold and Valyrian steel, graven with enchantments. The dragon lords of old sounded such horns before the doom devoured them. With this horn, Iron Men, I can bind dragons to my will. So there's what I'm saying is that all the stuff about the doom and ancient Valyrian sorcery is something that is floating up in the story. And Marwyn the Mage is probably bringing one of those glass candles to Daenerys, which means she'll probably be using the glass candle. And here is the quote about, let's see here. Pate knew about the glass candles, though he had never seen one burn. They were the worst kept secret of the Citadel. It was said that they had been brought to Old Town from Valyria 1,000 years before the Doom. He had heard there were 4. One was green and 3 were black, and all were tall and twisted. So I am crossing my fingers that Marwyn has the green one and is bringing Dany the green glass candle. But regardless of that, as I've said many times, Marwyn the Mage, last we saw him, is very concerned about the others and about Daenerys being the only one that can fight the others. And he's going to Slaver's Bay to help Daenerys. So is he going to bring one of these glass candles with him that he's been using to keep tabs on the others this whole time? Of course he is. That means that Dany's going to be coming in contact with a glass candle and probably using it. I suspect this is how Dany will, quote unquote, go to Asshai, which George originally had planned for her to go to Asshai and decided not to. So I think that the whole level of Valyrian sorcery is going to be rising. And I think that knowledge about the Doom and knowledge about dragons is going to only becoming more important in the story. Isn't that right, girl? Yes.
Cleo has a lot of gestures for this.
She's doing great today. Aren't you, girl? Yeah. You want to dance? Want to dance? Good girl. Good girl. Okay.
Oh.
All right. So I think that pretty much wraps up most of what I wanted to say. I don't want to just keep going. I think this is mostly what I wanted to talk about. And I think we proved this thing stronger than I even intended on. I called it a conspiracy theory when I started out, but the more I thought about it, I don't see any other way that line about the gold from Casterly Rock applying. And this all just makes too much sense. It even starts to make sense out of why the Faceless Men didn't go and finish off the Targaryens and why they haven't killed Dany. All that's really super interesting.
Right. And it fits so well with what you've been talking about with Dany as burning the Masters and, you know, part of her Targaryen, you know, grappling with her Targaryen heritage and legacy and what that means. And that maybe the Targaryens have always been anti-slavery. Maybe that was, you know, like that she's just fulfilling a part of what it means to be a Targaryen by burning that, like burning the Masters is part of what it means to be a Targaryen, is to, you know, that was what they did. They were involved in destroying the Masters of Old Valyria. So I wonder if I like it.
So consider this. It is still possible that Daenerys the Dreamer did see the Doom. We know that Targaryens have prophetic dreams a lot. That is very, very much a Targaryen thing. So we could even get into like dark, you know, time travel paradox territory where they saw the Doom coming and then like figured out that they were actually supposed to make it happen. And then so they sort of participated in fulfilling the vision, like, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to destroy Valyria. So maybe it was that kind of vision. And then the other thing about Sign's importance is like, what else did Daenerys the Dreamer see? Did she see Daenerys? And do the Faceless Men know what's in that book?
Right.
See, that could be how this all ties together, is that it's not that House Targaryen has maintained this knowledge all this time, but the Faceless Men may have knowledge of Daenerys' prophecies, Daenerys the Dreamer's prophecies, and thus they might know that they are waiting for Dany and that she's important to fight the others and all that kind of stuff. Thank you, D.D. Villano. Oh, what was that, girl?
I don't think
Thank
she
you for the
liked it.
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Dee. She appreciates the discussion, and yeah, it is a nice little supplement to the Daenerys stuff. I think I will add it to that playlist.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even plan on that. It just kind of evolved its way into that, which is great. Very much fits with that.
And the other thing is, yes, Marwyn the Mage and Quaithe, two of my favorite characters. I guess I'll go ahead and mention the Starry Wisdom conspiracy, which is not really a conspiracy, just a theory. So, Starry Wisdom Church, founded by the Bloodstone Emperor in Ashai, and it's the darkest religion that we know of, or whatever. We do know that it is still practiced to this day in port towns and by sailors. And this makes a lot of sense because sailors in the olden days all have to be astronomers, of course. That's how you navigate the seas, is by the stars. And so it has always been true in the real world that sailors tend to gravitate towards astronomy-based religions. And so it makes sense that the cult of Starry Wisdom is therefore practiced in port cities around the world. And then we've got this cool line about Marwyn and all the weird, creepy stuff he does, one of which is hanging out at strange dockside temples, which sounds like Starry Wisdom Church. And of course, the glass candles, I think, are a key thing because they're associated with Valyria, but of course we know that Quaithe is from Ashai, and Quaithe sits in Ashai using the glass candle for most of the series. That's how she's communicating with Dany and appearing to Dany. So I tend to think that Starry Wisdom Church is all about astral projection and glass candles, and the fact that we see Quaithe and Marwyn both using glass candles, they're both concerned about the others. They're both highly aware of prophecy. They both believe Daenerys is the chosen one. And so I think there's a confluence of ideas here. I do think they are Starry Wisdom connected. And I think that Dany, when she gets into that glass candle, like, I don't know, I've got all kinds of hopes for seeing more glimpses of the Great Empire of the Dawn, or Dany seeing more stuff about the past, more talk of Starry Wisdom Church openly. Marwyn and Dany talking is going to be fascinating.
The other piece to fit in here is R'hllor, potentially, and we didn't even talk about R'hllor, but R'hllorism was the religion of the slaves in the Freehold. And the R'hllorists also believe that Dany is the chosen one. That's the word coming out from the Red Temple, is that Dany is the chosen in Volantis. And Dany seems potentially poised. We've talked about this before, that Dany seems poised to destroy at least the inner city of Volantis, which, who lives in the inner city of Volantis? The slave masters. So that could have potentially tie in as well. We didn't talk about R'hllor or R'hllorism potentially being involved with the Doom, because it's the religion of the slaves, and kind of how that might be connected. Like, that's another piece to throw in here with the faceless men and all of that. Is did R'hllorism play a role, or R'hllorists play a role at all in any of this? We don't really have much evidence, but we know that it's the religion of the slaves. That the R'hllorists are seem like they're excited for Dany destroying slavery and poised to try and bring her to Volantis to destroy slavers living in the inner city of Volantis. So
yeah, I'm just anticipating the big the Sparrows versus R'hllor showdown that's coming in Westeros, all the religious zealots going to war. But yes, like you said, the R'hllorists it is the religion of the slaves. And so it's very convenient for Dany.
AK says death by fire is, Alicia Kingston says death by fire is sacred to the R'hllorists. So it makes sense that they would back Dany, which again fits with that idea. Death is mercy. Death is sacred. Death by fire is sacred. Dany's going to be burning the whites. That all ties in as well. It's just another layer of symbolism and theme that connects.
Thank you, Alicia Kingston. And Ambitious Witch says, I always thought Church of Starry Wisdom is a shadow over Innsmouth Lovecraft reference. It is, but it's not just that. George has taken several Lovecraft things, but they're not just nods. He's makes his own version of them and does stuff with them. So the Church of Starry Wisdom does appear to be active. And like I said, I think both Quaithe and Marwyn are apart, which means they have a plan for Dany.
Right. Guilty Undertaker does mention that Jack and Hagar mentions the Red God. That's right, with Arya when they're fleeing out of the city. No, that's the nameless god. But anyway, I think he does.
He does. No, he does. He mentions him of fire and how the three should have burned, and that's why they owe the deaths to the Red God and all that. Yeah.
So yeah, good job. But yes, super chat.
Thank you, Catherine Halverson. who likes the direction that the chat has taken. Enthusiasm returning in a big way. Well, that is music to my ears. That's just what we want to hear. Yeah, the air is starting to clear. The bad show ending bitterness is starting to dissipate. We've all gotten stuff off our chest, and we're remembering why we love the books so much, because it's got all kinds of fun stuff in here. And the last little conspiracy theory I'll throw in here is Dragon Bomb theory. The other theory about how the Faceless Men could have pulled off the Doom has to do with dragon eggs potentially being explosive. This primarily comes from Summerhall. We know that Summerhall was this giant conflagration that burned much hotter than the alchemists expected. And it burned way out of control. And we also know that 7 dragon eggs were present, and that the whole purpose of this was to wake these dragon eggs. And so potentially dragon eggs might have explosive power inside of them if you do the wrong sorcery. And so we've also got this event at Hardhome, where the Hardhome blew up in a giant conflagration that was seen from the wall, okay, which is a long way away. It looked like the sun was rising in the north, they said. So this could be a volcanic event, obviously. Hardhome shows signs of volcanic activity because there's fertile soil around there where there isn't elsewhere, because there was a town there. We have those caves in the hills, the Screaming Caves, which definitely could be lava rock, lava tubes, or something like that. However, there's this really weird tale of a maester from the Citadel who goes and visits Hardhome before it blows up. And he goes there and talks to a lot of wildlings and collects lore and asks questions, then goes straight back to the Citadel and writes a book, and then returns to he leaves the Citadel and it's never seen from again. And then shortly after, Hardhome blows up. And so it's possible that Hardhome was I've even heard it suggested that it was a test for the Doom, that they were blowing up dragon eggs, trying to, like I said, develop the Doom technology, because Hardhome happened about 600 years ago, meaning a couple, 150 years before the Doom or so, something like that. I'm going to see if I can pull that quote. But what do you think of all that crap? It's pure conspiracy, but
yeah, it's interesting. I was trying to think if I had misremembered. My first thought was that the wildfire caches are called eggs, but they're actually called fruit. The little pots of wildfire are called fruit.
Oh yeah.
But I was my first thought was if they were called that, then that could be interesting. But yeah, that they're just little. I guess you'd have to say they're little bombs. The eggs could potentially be little explosive fire bombs if set off in a particular way.
Okay, so here's the quote. Let me read this and then give me your thoughts. So it says, Hardhome was once the only settlement approaching a town in the lands beyond the wall, sheltered on Storald's Point and commanding a deep water harbor. But 600 years ago, it was burned and its people destroyed, though the Watch cannot say for certainty what happened. Some say the cannibals from Skagos fell on them, others that the slavers from across the narrow sea were at fault. The strangest stories from a ship of the Watch sent to investigate tell of hideous screams echoing down from the cliffs above Hardhome, where no living man or woman could be found. A most fascinating account of Hardhome can be found in Maester Willis's Hardhome, an account of 3 years spent beyond the wall among savages, raiders, and woods witches. Willis journeyed to Hardhome on a Pentoshi trader and established himself there as a healer and counselor so that he might write of their customs. He was given the protection of Gorm the Wolf, a chieftain who shared control of Hardhome with 3 other chiefs. When Gorm was murdered in a drunken brawl, however, Willis found himself in mortal danger and made his way back to Old Town. There he sent down his account, only to vanish the year after the illuminations were done. It was said in the Citadel that he was last seen at the docks looking for a ship that would take him to Eastwatch by the sea and meeting back to Hardhome. So, like I said, this is shortly before it blew up, and we've got maesters going up there and doing research, coming back to the Citadel, sharing whatever they learned, and then going back to Hardhome. Why is he going back? Maybe he had a wildling girlfriend. Maybe. That'd be the sweet thing. But just maybe, they were planting dragon bombs and messing around with the Doom technology.
I don't know how to change names is mentioning what I was just thinking, which is that the idea of eggs having explosive power that causes a bunch of fire goes back to the moon and the moon meteor, because the moon is an egg that is filled with dragons. The moon is a dragon egg. and the moon exploded and rained down shards that caused fires in the long night. So yes, that would be the connection between like moon, like eggs having some kind of explosive power is the moon.
Thank you.
The moon explosion. So
this sort of thing fills my heart with joy. So
got to get moon meteor apocalypse in there somewhere. And I think someone in the chat earlier up had brought up the idea that maybe moon meteors were involved in the Doom of Valyria. The timeline doesn't work for it lining up with the long night. That's way out of it, but you could, but it's still it's similar symbolically, even if it's not the exact same event. You have some kind of cataclysmic event. Because I mean, there would have been when big volcanoes like that go off, you have ash clouds, and you sometimes have global, like with the 14 flames. Chances are there would have been like a mini, like potentially even a mini long night in terms of, you know, maybe a year.
There actually should have been. Yeah, there should have been with that much volcanic activity.
Right.
And that's one of the actually pieces of evidence that I've used to say that the long night was not a volcanic event, because the Doom is the biggest volcano that George could possibly think of, and it did not give us a long night. So we need something bigger, you know, and moon meteors would be the thing. So
right, but the Doom works as like a smaller scale parallel. Yes, because you have, you know, the long night, you have it raining down obsidian shards, which is like moon meteors falling. The obsidian shards, especially because they're dragon glass, and so, you know, it fits with the idea of like meteors as dragons and obsidian being connected. So it all works very nicely. Yeah,
even the rain of black blood. Yeah, because we got bleeding stars raining down.
Yep.
And so Matt Diff with the super chat says, the idea of eggs exploding is kind of like how the others used the potential life of a child, or the warlocks wanting Dany's potential, or Dany's baby Rhaego going into the dragon. So yeah, that definitely fits. Absolutely it does.
Right. Fits with that whole idea of sacrificing fertility for power, which is something that runs all through the Song of Ice and Fire, which is a very mythological idea. That in order to have like eternal life frequently comes at the cost of fertility. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
so
that totally works.
To wrap this up, I want to sum up the basic logic that we went through at the beginning. I see a lot of people have joined us midstream, and it's always good to sum things up at the end. Tell them what you're going to say, then say it, then tell them what you just said, you know. So basically the idea here, if you're joining us late, is that we know the Faceless Men were involved in the Doom because the kindly man tells Arya that they brought the gift to the Masters. We know that the Valyrians had a sorceress relationship with the 14 Flames. They were a source of magic. We know that Valyria existed for 5,000 years on top of all these volcanoes, apparently without them ever blowing their top. And then all of a sudden they blew at once, which strongly suggests they're using magic to keep them at equilibrium, like a banked fire in a forge. And so that sets up the very logical mechanism for the Faceless Men to cause the Doom, because what do the Faceless Men do? They assassinate people. All you've got to do is assassinate the mages, keeping control of the volcanoes, maybe even just over one volcano, but perhaps everywhere. And then everything's going to get out of control. Everything blows up. Then we have a prophecy that is referred to in the World of Ice and Fire of an old Valyrian prophecy that the Doom of Valyria would have something to do with the gold of Casterly Rock. Then we're told that that Lannisters bought Bright Roar, a Valyrian steel sword, most likely from House Targaryen. They paid enough gold to raise an army. So now we have the gold of Casterly Rock in motion in the hands of the Targaryens right before the Doom happens. And the Faceless Men did the Doom. So you can see how this works. House Targaryen pays the Faceless Men to pull off the Doom. They're left with the only people with dragons, and fait accompli. There you go. So that is the working theory. I have elevated it from conspiracy theory to probably true. That is my determination. Probably true. So
I agree that it's probably true. I think it makes more sense than anything else that I can think of, because the Faceless Men, like, it's one of those, like, we know the Faceless Men are involved. Someone must have hired them. And yeah, all of the pieces just fit so neatly together. I don't think you could come up with a theory that's more plausible or even approaches this level of plausibility for what happened, given
the
what
alternative is that the Faceless Men did it of their own volition, and that prophecy about the Lannister gold is just stupid and doesn't have any meaning and just wasn't true.
which is
That's the
not
alternative.
generally right, which is not generally how Martin works.
Oh,
Mm.
what was that?
But and it fits so nicely with that whole like the fact that the Valyrians didn't touch the gold of Casterly Rock. You know, because like we know that the Valyrians were so greedy for gold and silver that they kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the volcanoes around the 14 flames looking for gold and silver. And you have Casterly Rock like not that far away, and you have dragons, and you could totally steal that gold. But if you have a prophet, it's one of those like to try and avert the prophecy, they ended up kind of fulfilling it by leaving the gold of Casterly Rock alone. Then the Lannisters were able to use that gold to buy a sword from the Targaryens, and then the Targaryens then used that gold to hire the Faceless Men. Like, if the Valyrians had been willing to like dig for that gold in Casterly Rock, then the Lannisters wouldn't have had the gold to buy the Valyrian steel sword that, you know, the gold from which was then used by the Targaryens to hire the Faceless Men. So by trying to avert the prophecy by avoiding the gold, they ended up fulfilling the prophecy because the gold, you know, found its way there in another way, which is like the kind of ironic fulfillment that George just loves with prophecy, that like the more you try and avoid it, the more likely it is that it's going to actually happen. So
there you go. And people have been pointing out that it does echo roughly thematically the Mines of Moria, the idea of the dwarves delving too deep and, you know, releasing the Balrogs and all that stuff. So yeah, it's different, you know, obviously different spin, but a lot of the themes are present. So very cool. And my lighting just changed and now it's like all super bright on my face. Why is this happening? There we go. Cameras are weird. Anyways.
I don't know. They are weird. So yeah, that's all good. Yep.
Goose is in his there you can see him. There he is. See.
Oh.
He gets a little crazy about this drawer here. See, Goose, what are you doing? Are you messing around in my weed drawer, buddy? What's in there? What's in there, buddy? You want me to stop dreaming and pay attention to birds now? Okay. Yep. Well, there you go, guys. Thank you very much for joining us today, discussing the Doom of Valyria. And there you go. It was an inside job. The Targaryens did it. And wow, pretty cool, huh? This is like probably the most successful conspiracy plotting like thing that anyone's ever done in history, if this is true, in A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, this was massively successful. It's really worked. So, yeah.
Right. Corliss Whitefire points out in the chat, I wouldn't even be surprised if there were certain members of House Targaryen early on in Fire and Blood who are aware of the conspiracy. Rhaena at one point says Valyria cannot rise again. So she may have been saying, like, Valyria, like, we won't let that happen. Like, we have specifically put down, it may be, it's like, you know, implying that she knew why the Targaryens had been involved in destroying Valyria and that they wouldn't allow that kind of thing to happen. That it, like, cannot in terms of must not. I'd have to go back to read the context, not remember that quote, but that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, keep that in the back of your head as you do your Fire and Blood reread. And Carl Karsnark asks how we ever get confirmation. Well, the Faceless Men know if they did it. And they are going, like we said, earlier in the stream, I don't know if you missed it, but we were discussing, could they have a purpose for Arya or even Daenerys? So yeah, we might find out what that purpose is, and it may tie back to this history with the Doom. And Dany's going to be having that glass candle from Marwyn. Marwyn knows a lot of stuff himself. He's seen a few pages of this book. So Marwyn might just tell Dany. Dany might see history in a glass candle vision. And like I said, the whole Faceless Men Iron Bank conspiracy is kind of a smoking gun on the shelf at this point that we're waiting to go off. So whenever that plot comes out, whatever Jaken's doing with the book at the Citadel, like, we're going to find out something about where that's going. And that, I think, is how we will find out about the answer to this Doom conspiracy. So there you go. By the way, in A Dance with Dragons, Dany is presented a tapestry of Valyria before the Doom that covers half the floor of her throne room. And I just want that tapestry. Can someone make that? That would be awesome.
Oh, man, that would be really, really cool. So shall we hype our things?
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, that was an excuse for me to say, can I hype my thing?
Yes. Well, you're reminding me. I always forget. So
yeah, David has mentioned a couple of times about doing a Fire and Blood reread. I am currently working on. I'm going to be exploring the dance, very in-depth exploration of the Dance of Dragons. Partly because we're hopefully going to be getting it on the new prequel show, but also because I think that, as David said, the dance is the closest, is the most extensive real world like historical event that we have. We have the most information about the dance. So clearly Martin cares a lot about the dance and wants us to know what happened during the Dance of the Dragons. And I think that is partly because in the Dance of Dragons, we can foresee it foreshadows events and arcs and potential characters for the current storyline. And I know that when the prequel show was announced, people made the connection between the way Dany died and the way Rhaenyra dies at the end of the dance, and assuming that Rhaenyra and Dany are parallels for each other. And I think that's wrong. So that's part of what I'm going to be talking about in the dance. Like, really, I just want to do like a big in-depth analysis. We're going to talk about symbolism. We're going to talk about mythology. We're going to talk about characters, because there are some really interesting characters, but there's also some really good nuggets for foreshadowing what I think the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring are going to do with these characters. But also, I think it's a good way to show that like Dany doesn't go crazy, because the dance parallel for Rhaenyra, the parallel in the modern storyline for Rhaenyra in the dance is not Dany, it's Cersei. They have a lot in common. So yes, I wrote up my script for my first kind of intro video that's going to be coming out hopefully soon. I have to edit it and then record it. So I'm doing that. That's what I'm working on, A Song of Ice and Fire wise. And then we have a live stream coming up on Wednesday, but I'm not going to be the only guest. So David can tell you all who else is going to be involved. It's going to be great.
Yes, we'll have Melanie Lot 7 and Quinn from Quinn's Ideas. He changed his YouTube channel from Ideas of Ice and Fire to just Quinn's Ideas, because he's been branching out, obviously. So yeah, it'll be a nice full crew, all four of us. I'm going to let Gretchen and Melanie and Quinn get in on their comments of what we've discussed already in the first 3 Dany episodes, but I'll also be taking a lot of questions from the chat. The first 3 Dany streams, we've had a lot of notes, and I have not taken many questions. There have been a lot of good comments in the thing. So come show up this Wednesday night, 7 Eastern, and you can definitely get your Dany discussion points kicked around by our nice little panel here. So that is the main thing I have to hype. And I'll just keep mentioning until it goes viral. My Rhaegar show YouTube video is awesome, guys. It's funny and awesome. If you haven't seen it, I did a dumb Witcher Rhaegar thing. I pretended like The Witcher was a story about Rhaegar Ashara and made a 20-minute breakdown video of it. It's very stupid, but also
it's funny.
So
it's very
check
funny.
that out. It's on my YouTube channel. Share it around with your friends if you would. That'd be nice. I'd appreciate it. And that's it. I'll see you on Wednesday night.
Yep.
LuciferMeansLightbringer.com is where you can find all my stuff. You guys know where the YouTube channel is at. The podcast is Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire.
Oh, I forgot to mention earlier, the chat and I have all decided that your new name needs to be Gucifer Means Lightbringer. So just so you know.
Well, we did have a big, me and my friends had a big laugh when the hacker Gucifer 2.0 emerged in the Russian hacking story a couple years ago, if you remember. So we call him Gucifer 0.02 because he's very small. But yes. And he's got more than a little Lucifer in him, don't you, buddy? All right, guys. Thank you for joining me. Happy Sunday. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you on Wednesday.
Bye, everyone.